Okay, thank you, everybody. Thank you, David. Welcome to Between Two Firms at Duke University. We didn't talk about that part of it. I'm Brian Murray. I'm the director of the Nicholas Institute for Energy, Environment, and Sustainability, and I will be introducing David more fully in just a moment. I do want to say we're taking a bit of a pivot. You know, the last couple of sessions have focused a lot on development finance and not exclusively, but it had a heavy tilt that way, and international capital flows. And now we're moving back to the U.S. and we'll really sort of set the foundation, I think, with a discussion of the policy environment in which we're operating, and then that will motivate a lot of discussions about finance moving forward. I could not have a better guest on stage with us to talk about this. David is a true luminary in the field. Up until, I guess, January 20th was the Undersecretary for Infrastructure in the Department of Energy. Take a look at an org chart there and see everything that's underneath that, and that's a lot. He came to that with a very illustrious career in the private sector, including for 12 years was the CEO of NRG Energy, and took it from, I believe when you inherited the reins, it was in some form of bankruptcy, and took it to one of the largest utilities in the United States. So it's really quite a perspective on what it's like to deliver affordable, accessible, reliable, and clean energy to a demanding public. After NRG in the private sector, he served in various advisory and leadership roles focused on the clean energy transition. A senior operating executive for Pegasus Capital Advisors, serves on the board of several energy companies, and really is known. Right? When I say he's a luminary, I think about David, and I think about our friend, our late friend Jim Rogers, as really being kind of advocates for decarbonization in the power sector, being almost evangelical about that, and really has been a leading voice in the utility sector, in the private sector, in the energy sector on climate change and the need for energy industry transition. So David, those are really that's sort of a short set of highlights to your incredibly impressive career. So tell us a little bit more about yourself and kind of where you came from, how you got to this point, and maybe where you're headed.
Well, all those things you say, and as you get older, the bio just gets longer and longer until it takes up the whole time. But the other thing that you didn't say in terms of the job part is that I'm unemployed.
Okay.
So I just want to make sure everyone knows. But I'm really grateful.
Did you bring business cards?
Yeah, I'm really grateful to be here, and I love the title from billions into trillions, because one of the things that I didn't realize you could do when you're in government, if you have a certain position, you get these things called challenge coins that you can hand out as a token of appreciation. And my personal one says turning billions into trillions at the top. I do think it's important when you talk about things. First of all, anything I say is just my personal opinion, and that's what it's worth. And it is true, I think I mainly got invited here because I served in government and all, but as you mentioned, one of the lines that I use that people at the Department of Energy would get tired of is like, look, I'm a CEO, I'm a capitalist masquerading as a government official for the time, because they reached out to me to come in after the bipartisan infrastructure law was passed in the fall of 2022. Because the structure of that was precisely to turn billions into trillions through the government would give financial assistance or grants, or as I like to call it, free equity, but more sophisticated people than me called it non-dilutive equity into projects. But the private sector had to put in 50% or more of the money. And so the Department of Energy was basically given, if I take credit for the 48C that technically belonged to Treasury, but we did it. So we had $108.3 billion of grant money, and also the Loan Program Office was given $350 billion roughly of loan authority, and to invest that, to deploy that capital on behalf of the DOE across a range of technologies, and was what I was responsible for. But the whole thing was about inducing the private sector the government was to act as a catalyst, and so we did a pretty good job of getting the money committed, but of course we're in a different era right now, and so if I could, I was just going to say a couple things about that, because I think it's pretty much what's on everyone's mind. Yeah. I mean, first of all, I mean, obviously, I always caution my kids that, at the end of the adjective spectrum, there are words that are commonly misused, like words like unique or unprecedented, because but we are definitely, obviously, in unprecedented times, and one of the things that's suffered right now is predictability, and I'm going to come back to that because that's very important. So, I came out of the Department of Energy. There's been lots of changes at the Department of Energy, and I'm no student of government, but I would say it looks like there's 3 ways that you can run an agency, and specifically, like in this case, the Department of Energy. You can run it based on ideology, and I think there was a sign on the first day of the Trump administration that when they declared a national energy emergency, which I actually thought, oh, that's pretty cool, that's a good idea. But then they excluded solar and wind from the potential solutions. And last year in the United States, 96% of the new electricity supply provided was zero carbon, and most of that was solar or wind. So to declare a national energy emergency, but then to exclude 96%, that's ideology. The second thing, you could run an agency for a different purpose. And in this case, what we've seen since then with DOGE and all is to run agencies to reduce costs to pay for a tax cut, right? Now, one of the things I don't understand is if it's everyone knows that you can do the math. There are only 3 or 4 things that really matter if you're looking for a multi-trillion-dollar tax cut to pay for that, and none of those are at the Department of Energy. So there's sort of an anti-civil service bias there, and I just want to say, I say this wherever I am, as a private sector person that came into government with the normal conceits about what government service was like, I couldn't have been more wrong. I mean, the people I worked with at the Department of Energy were the most capable, dedicated people I've ever come across in my life. And I saw on TV last night, I admitted I was watching MSNBC, that my college classmate, Michael Lewis, was on TV. Apparently he's written a book talking about civil servants, and the example he used was the Department of Energy people that are out at the Hanford site in Washington State, cleaning up the nuclear site. And I got to visit a couple of those sites, even though it was not part of my remit at the Department of Energy. And the commitment, the expertise of these people, every American should be grateful for what these folks do. And then the third way you can run an energy department is to actually provide safe, affordable, reliable, and clean energy. And that's what we tried to do.
Distant third, right?
Yeah. And hopefully after this shock and awe period and paying for the tax cut that the Trump administration is going through, they'll get back to that third priority, because I certainly think Secretary Wright probably wants to do that. That's probably why he joined the government. And there's just a lot that Democrats and Republicans, energy is a very pragmatic thing, permitting reform, transmission, nuclear. There's a lot that we could agree on if they want to, work on that. So anyway, so there's hope for collaboration, as to whether or not it leads to actually fighting climate change. A lot of people go around with the Nixon goes to China, situation. Like, I'm not that optimistic about that, because that took Nixon. And, we've had the champion of climate, Elon Musk, with President Trump, and Trump has changed Musk on the topic of climate. Musk has not changed. So anyway, so we'll see what we can do.
Well, Nixon was a Duke alum. Maybe it just takes a Duke alum to do this. I don't know. But yeah, let's deal on that. I think you sort of set up the situation well. I mean, the administration came in and Day one, talked about energy dominance. That's the name of this session, called energy dominance, because that's a term of art that's being used by the current administration. But I think rather than, I don't know, just kind of try to tear that apart, let's think about ways in which partnerships spurred by the federal government might still be able to move the needle substantially forward. Can you say, again, you had a very large, your infrastructure division at DOE had very kind of large apparatus under it, and I know some of it has been dismantled, but what are the opportunities that you can see that maybe take the C word out of the conversation but can move things forward on that front?
Well, I think I've been around the energy world for a long time, and when I started, if you think, we all think of energy as, it's energy, but energy used to exist as, think of it as $2 trillion vertically integrated infrastructure plays. One which was based on, oil and gas extraction, ships, refineries, pipelines, gas stations. That $1 trillion vertical was designed to provide the energy needs for transportation. And then you had another $1 trillion system that was designed to provide for electricity to, fix the environment. Over the last 10, 15 years, those have actually merged with electric cars and things. And what the Trump administration seems to be intent upon is bifurcating them again. And so what we could have, what I actually expect we'll have, energy dominance, I think, I asked someone at the DOE, I said, look, have they put any have they written memos as to explain what that means? And they're like, yeah, apart from drill, baby, drill, we're not really sure, what it means. But you could have, I think energy dominance, the way they think about it, is oil and gas. And it must mean exports. It can't, in the private sector, dominance is a word we'd use for pricing power, but I don't think anyone thinks the U.S. has enough production to have pricing power in oil the way Saudi did for, a while. So anyway, so you can have energy dominance on the oil and gas side, but what we're facing on the electricity side is actually an energy crisis. In the United States, that the electricity demand, which you've written about, is, suddenly turned around. The lead times to get anything done in the United States is, and this is one of the ironies, and this is where if you need to add a gigawatt of capacity in the United States in a year, the only solution you have that you could reasonably do in a year is solar, right? And then, maybe wind 2 years. Incremental natural gas, is GE going to build another gas turbine factory in the United States just because they've had a pop in demand? I think they would rather go around and tell everyone, as they are telling everyone, that their production line is fully bought out until 2030. So, incremental gas, 5 or 6 years, advanced geothermal, best case scenario, 5 to 6 years, nuclear, and I was responsible for the nuclear program. Best case scenario, 10 years. So where people could come together, because having an electricity crisis is bad politics, whether you're a Democrat or a Republican. And that's where I think clean energy, quick solutions can come in.
Yeah, I think, I want to get to actually your sort of thoughts on maybe what the future of the IRA credits are, but I will observe it. As you have, you talked about 90+% of the new capacity being put on the grid in the United States is renewable or zero carbon, and the outlook, all the stuff that I look at says, yes, great degree of uncertainty about what the credits are going to look like, but certainly on the solar front, they just expect it to continue to move in the direction you did, and so that loops us back to So my colleagues at the Institute will recognize where I'm about to go with this. We do a lot of convenings and roundtables, and usually on the topic that we have, there's one emerging topic that we call the drinking game topic. And it was permitting reform about a year ago, and now it's AI, cloud, and data centers. One thing I did read about Secretary Wright last week, or maybe it was earlier this week even, announced when he was out in Colorado at the National Renewable Energy Lab that, they're going to start considering DOE lands to site data centers and source the energy right there, saying, it's hard to, there's interconnection queues and all these certain challenges. So, he remained a bit agnostic, at least in that talk, about what the source of energy would be. But do you see things like that as being a potential role they can play, or is that just too small ball and symbolic?
Well, it's partially symbolic, but that's what government does sometimes, is lead by example. But I saw Secretary Wright's too, but the articles failed to mention that 2 years ago, Secretary Granholm actually announced a program because the Department of Energy owns massive amounts of land in the West around some of the nuclear sites in Idaho and in Washington State, for example, to put renewables on those sites. Whether data centers go there as well. So it's not a new idea, but it's not a bad idea at all. I'm not sure that Secretary, I didn't see his full announcement. Was he talking about putting gas plants on NREL?
He just said providing the energy there. And actually, I think was even asked about, he said solar and wind are fine as long as we don't subsidize them. So so maybe that's a point in that direction. And so pivoting over to the IRA, you mentioned the bipartisan infrastructure law. And for those of us who actually don't, I think most people in the room understand what the billions and the trillions are, but the billions, this was motivated last year by the IRA and the bipartisan infrastructure law, or IIJA, being billions of dollars in public finance to catalyze trillions of dollars in private capital. Do you have any thoughts about really, no decisions have been stated anyway about the IRA tax credits. There's been money, there's been attempts to pull some of the grant money back from the states, but the tax credits, A, do you have any prognostications about them? And B, what do you think the consequences would be of that?
Well, on the tax credits, I have an unusual take, because I think after the election went the way it did, we all thinking that the new administration would come in, with their different ideology, but on the less extreme end of it is that what they would do, as happened in the Trump 1 administration, is they would repeal a couple of tax credits, modify a couple of tax credits, and then declare the Inflation Reduction Act fully repealed, and that most of them could go forward. But I think all bets are off. I have an unusual spin on this, because there are groups, family offices and all that are forming to defend the Inflation Reduction Act, tax credits, and call me a contrarian, but it actually, in the current environment, the tax credits don't matter, in the sense that, most of the tax credits are aimed at big investments. Some of them are direct to consumer, like the vehicle tax credit, but most of them are like, build a multi-billion-dollar hydrogen plant and you'll get an investment tax credit or a production tax credit. But I don't know how many people in this room ever were a financial modeler. I was never a financial modeler. I wasted my education at law school. But 12 years as a CEO of a power company, I looked at countless 20 to 30 year financial models to justify a multi-$100 million investment. And the way it works is that, some young person has put together the model. There's roughly 10 to 15 economic inputs into a model that lead to what you're looking for at the conclusion is, what the IRR is. And if the IRR is higher than your weighted average cost of capital, then you're supposed to go forward. That's what apparently they teach in business school. But the idea of a tax credit is predicated on the idea that the other 10 to 15 economic data points in the model are predictable. And so the idea of a tax credit is you do this model, you're trying to build a new technology that maybe is a little too expensive. You start with you come out with like a 4% IRR or something. The government comes along, gives you a tax credit, and suddenly it's an 11% IRR, and you can go forward with the project. But if the 10 to 15 basic inputs are all entirely unpredictable, if I'm the CEO, and I still think like a CEO, I'd be like, no, I'm not putting any money into anything. I don't care if it's brown or green. A recession could be coming. God knows what the Fed is. What's the cost of money going to be? What's the cost of exchange rate? What's the cost of steel, aluminum? You don't know anything right now. And long-term infrastructure projects require predictability. And so if I were a CEO of a capital-intensive company, I would be hoarding cash right now. And I'm just not sure that that's what we need when we have this looming electricity crisis come. We need people to be investing.
So absent like super aggressive federal policy on the incentives front, and again, sort of getting back to the Loan Program Office that we talked about earlier, a big role that they played was in, providing, using public finance and then as a source of de-risking capital. And then we talked earlier today about how these sort of tranched funds, if you will, there's just private capital, there's philanthropy and then there's private capital. And the philanthropy could, I guess, afford to be the lost leader in these endeavors. So in this kind of new constructed, reconstructed world in which private investors in clean energy are thinking about risks and hoping for de-risk from policy, what do you think could happen moving forward in order to get over the hump? Or do you think we're just going to pull back to the less risky investments and go with whatever that's produced by market returns?
There's a few questions inside that question, but let me start with, you mentioned LPO, and I think there's a session later today to talk about the idea of a private sector LPO that my colleague from LPO, Rebecca Casper, sitting right here, wave your hand, Rebecca. Yes, let's have a round of applause for Rebecca. So she's always more eloquent than me, so I think people should stay around and listen to Rebecca answer that question.
Okay.
But
I'm teeing it up, that's all.
But I want to put in a plug for a parallel idea, because it's an interesting thing. In the normal capital stack, loans are less risky than equity, right? We all know that. It's a little bit different at the Department of Energy, because the Loan Program Office operate on principles of limited recourse project finance. In some situations, they give up to 80%, of the money and all. And again, Rebecca will talk about that. I want to put in a plug for the equity, the grant offices, because across our transmission office, what was once called the Office of Clean Energy Demonstration, which I don't think it'll, at the very least, it won't remain in that name, which had, nuclear and hydrogen and carbon capture and industrial decarbonization. We went over the last 2 years through these selective processes, and it was Darwinistic. In most of the competitive processes we had, they were 5 to 10 times oversubscribed, and so the government went through extensively. The way that the Department of Energy evaluated the bids was incredible. When I first saw how we were doing it, I'm like, this can't be possible, that we can put this number of resources into picking the winners here. Those projects, in a lot of ways, even though it's equity, are less risky because they're predicated on the idea that the private sector partner is willing to put in 50 to 90%. And if the private sector partner is willing to put in 50 to 90%, then the project has to have pretty solid legs on it. And we don't know yet how many of those projects are going to either be canceled by the current administration or are going to die from neglect, which is something I worry about. But if philanthropy, if family offices would come together and put together a fund to sort of substitute for the equity side of the DOE, give me a call, because I can tell you in each of the programs which are the most important, which are the best, because we hit the bid on a range of risk profiles as one would, so that's what I worry about. In addition to the private sector LPO is a great idea, but also we had 150 projects of over $100 million each across those technologies. And I worry about the outcome for those, because those were really solid projects, private sector led.
Long list of technologies that people are interested in. Some of us were at a dinner last night. We heard a lot about nuclear. You mentioned that nuclear was in your office. You've also run a utility. So could you give us some of your thoughts in the closing minutes that we have here, just about nuclear, maybe with the focus on small modular as a potential step forward, or more than a step?
Yeah, and look, I mean, everyone's a victim of their own life experience, and I actually, when I was running NRG in 2007, we filed the first permit for a new nuclear plant in the United States since 1979 at the South Texas nuclear plant for a new unit there. And 3 years later, I wrote off $354 million of money on engineering. So what I would say about nuclear, and look, again, I'm a private sector person, but I'm quite intolerant of people around the nuclear industry blaming the government for things, because, first of all, nuclear will not happen without government support, number one. Number two, the basic of infrastructure projects is you have to have some ability to demonstrate to people that you'll build something on time and on budget, or no one's going to finance it. And the nuclear industry has had a singular record of non-success in that area for the last 20 years. And so I think modular reactors are going to come. I think data centers made them essential. Historically, ironically, utilities in the United States were comparatively small compared to utilities in Europe and Asia, because they were built on a state level. But now we have these multi-trillion dollars. I said, at one point, the big hyperscalers, where they were all sort of $4 trillion companies, but they're not, today because of the recent drop. But the hyperscalers are big enough to put nuclear on their back and make it happen. Whether they want to. In fact, I'm sure they don't want to. But they can do that. One of the most amazing statistics for the financial people about it, the hyperscalers are so big that one of the hyperscalers could buy the biggest power company in the United States, NextEra, and not file an 8K. In other words, it's less than 5% of their market cap. Or again, it was before the recent drop. But and this is just a general point. We all want to talk about what the government can do and all, but in this coming electricity crisis, the most important people in the room are no longer the federal government or any government. It's the hyperscalers. And if you're a climate person, how much the hyperscalers stay committed to their zero carbon goals is the most important thing, because look, I mean, I don't see how they get these data centers built without gas-fired, combined cycle, and, will they put post-carbon capture on that? Will they own the methane leak, question? To me, that's probably the most important thing that's going to happen in climate in the next few years. And then, of course, what the states do, particularly if the state of California can, the fifth largest economy in the world, can, continue what we tried to do at the federal level. To me, those are the two most important things.
Well, interesting executive orders on that very front this morning, but neither of us had time to process that. I'd love to pull the thread a little bit on nuclear. I mean, at least there's one hyperscaler out there who's not afraid of nuclear per se, Microsoft. Redoing 3 Mile Island, but the real question is, will they get into small modular and take the upfront risk, I think. Probably you'd have to do it with some sort of tariff structure, like if you're working, just so that they kind of get their own price. So,
but can I just quickly say, I mean, hyperscalers got a lot of renewables built by just offering an offtake agreement. It's going to take a lot more from them on that. I mean, and it's not just Microsoft. They've started to make some investments, but the completion risk associated with nuclear is high, but also just the uncertainty of, can you get a wave of nuclear plants online in the United States by 2035? I'd be taking the under on that. And they talk about all these data centers being here by 2027, 28. I mean, even in the world of power plants, 7, 8 years, that's a long period to bridge. And so I think the most important thing is what do we do from now until 2035? Even if nuclear is the cavalry, what do we do while we wait for the cavalry to come?
Is the undermeaning it'll be here before 2035?
No,
Or, okay,
the
a little later. Okay. So I just want to make sure if my broker or whatever is in the room right now, who handles all my over-unders.
Yeah, and by that, just to be clear, because I don't want to throw, X Energy or TerraPower, any of the companies that are, I'm not talking about the first ones. I'm talking about a wave.
Yes.
Because again, I think a prudent CEO waits to see the first one come online before they go down the path of, ordering a bunch of them.
We're going to have to end with that wisdom. Thanks so much. This is going by really fast. It's been a lot of fun.